Themes and perspectives in international development and education. Looking at poverty in Mozambique and its impact on a child or young person's education. This presentation is looking at the issue of poverty, particularly having a focus on the country of Mozambique and how it can have an impact on the education of children, young people and families living within these circumstances, as well as looking at how it can affect a child's or young person's development, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, and academically as well. And as well as how poverty can decide and have an impact on whether a child or young person can attend school or whether they need to drop out. An overview of poverty itself. So, what is poverty? Poverty can be defined as the state of being poor. This definition has been identified by the Oxford Advanced Learners Dictionary 2020. So, poverty, or the state of being poor, can be described as not having enough of the necessities to be healthy and to be comfortable in the way they live and get by. So, not having access to the bare minimum to be able to develop properly. So which areas of the world can you see have higher rates of poverty? So the World Bank 2020 has researched and identified that the world's 43 highest poverty countries are classed as a fragile or conflicted affected situations or are in sub-Saharan Africa. This includes Mozambique, which will be discussed further on. It can be hard to get out of poverty within these countries, as a lot of the country is in poverty, so it is harder to be able to grasp opportunities to get out of it. Looking at poverty in Mozambique. When you look at the poverty rates for around the world, Mozambique has been identified as being the second highest poorest country within the world. This has been published by Focus Economics. This is suggesting that Mozambique as a country has some of the highest poverty rates just within one country. So why is it that Mozambique is one of the poorest countries across the world? Well, there are a number of reasons as to why this is. One of the reasons is due to the aftermath of the Civil War. This Civil War went on from 1977 to 1992. The Civil War took place between their pro-communist and anti-communist groups, which led to just under 1 million deaths and led to 5 million of their civilians being relocated, as well as leading to the development of agriculture being restricted, which means that them being able to develop their own agriculture as a country had to be restricted to how big it could get, and then as well as the regional economic activity being stopped due to not having the funds as a whole. This led to many families not having to evacuate their homes and having to live elsewhere with little to no money. So another reason is the external debt which a country has. So for about 6 years after the Civil War ended, so in about 1998, their foreign debt had reached $5 billion, and in 1999 the Mozambique government had spent 4 times more on paying off their debts than they did on their health and education for the country. This debt has been relieved slightly from 1998, where their debt was $8 billion, to looking at 2010, where their debt had been relieved to $4 billion. Even though their debt had been relieved slightly, they were still in so much debt that they are still classed as being extremely poor due to not being able to afford the essentials. And the third reason for Mozambique being so poverty driven is the dependence which Mozambique has on the workforce for agriculture, as this has contributed to the as they depend heavily on the work of agriculture. So where due to all the other sectors of workforce struggling to catch up once the war ended in 1992 due to there not being the funds. And there is only 7% of Mozambique's land which is sustainable to grow crops for their country. It has also been said that the future of Mozambique's economy is in the hands of their foreign investors. This states that, or gives the impression that Mozambique's economy isn't reliant major on them, it is reliant majorly on the people who invest in their economy, which can lead to these investors pulling out the money whenever they like. And then another reason is that they have a lack of access to health and social services. So this is due to a lack of clean and sanitary water access throughout the country itself, with there being less than half of Mozambique's population having access to the running water, which means that the majority of the population actually have to walk over an hour to get to the closest health facility. This means that they have a lack of adequate health facilities, which they may need quite urgently. There is also hope that there will be an expansion in this area of social services. This has been received from the Borgen project. This project also goes on to talk about how the area of social services can be majorly improved to help with developing the economy. Now looking at poverty and its education within Mozambique. So, in Mozambique, a child's education can be affected by so much by poverty that they live in. It's through no fault of their own. Some families are simply too poor to be able to send their children to school, even if the schools are free. This is because the families just don't have the money to be able to pay for uniforms and books and the necessary resources. These children that in these circumstances are having to go to work to help support their families. These jobs usually have them working 6-7 days a week on 12-hour shifts. So now looking at poverty and education in Mozambique and the school dropout rates. There is a lot of children in Mozambique that drop out of schools. This is due to the cost of uniforms, books and any other resources which they need. Leading them to not attend school and instead work to help support their families and loved ones. Instead, Mozambique as a whole has one of the highest school dropout rates across the world, with only 40% of the primary age children completing primary school and the other 53% going into work from a young age. This also shows that there is an average of 54% of Mozambique's population are classed as living below the poverty line. These economic struggles lead parents to make the difficult decision to send children out to work instead of school for an education, which means that they are unable to get what they need. So looking at education within Mozambique. And so within Mozambique, primary education is compulsory for all primary age children, although as they reach secondary school age, it is not compulsory, and children by the time age of 14 should work and not go to school. So they are encouraged to do this. And in the early 2000s, they decided that it'd be best to get rid of the fees to be able to gain a high number of primary school children in school. Teachers are outnumbered by the amount of students that they have in one classroom. Then looking at the poverty and the educational outcomes of children. The link between poverty and educational outcomes is most certainly there. Children who live with poverty tend to have a disadvantage in the educational outcomes that they have hit and achieved, and how quickly they're able to reach these outcomes as they go through their school years. This can be down to the resources, money and books which they have available to them, and the quality of these resources and books which they're able to get. Children who grow up in poverty will, more often than not, be further behind in their education and understanding of the different topics and subjects. This can be due to parents such carers having to prioritise other stuff like to spend their money on, leading to many struggling to retain information or concentrate for longer periods of time. So then, in conclusion, poverty can have a major effects on people's lives and the education which a child receives. This linked into Mozambique's high poverty rate, being the second poorest country in the world. According to Focus Economics, which there being a number of different reasons as to why Mozambique has so much poverty, which includes the aftermath of the civil war, which ended in 1992, along with the country's external debt being at $5 million in 2010. Overall, the poverty in Mozambique has an impact on children's education, as some families are too poor to even send their children to free schools, leading to children not getting the education they deserve, and instead they're having to get a job to help bring money into the family. This is an issue not just for Mozambique, but the world as a whole, because it leads to these children living in poverty to think that it is the only way forward and they've got no choice but to continue living in poverty, and that there is no way out, as it is all they know, and they don't know how to escape from it due to not having an education to be able to better the situation and circumstances which they can be in.